The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty town square, as people gathered for what many considered just another ordinary auction day. But for 16-year-old Lucy, this wasn't ordinary at all. This was the day that would decide her fate and the fate of the tiny baby sleeping in her arms. Lucy stood near the wooden platform, her bare feet dirty from the long walk to town. Her dress, once a cheerful blue, was now faded and torn at the hem, but none of that mattered. What mattered was little Rose, her sister's 3-month-old daughter, who had become Lucy's whole world after the terrible night that changed everything. 3 weeks ago, their small farmhouse had caught fire during a lightning storm. Lucy still woke up hearing the crackling flames and smelling the smoke. She had managed to grab baby Rose and escape, but her older sister Anna wasn't so lucky. Anna had run back into the burning house trying to save their family's few precious belongings, and she never came out. Now Lucy had nothing left except Rose and the clothes on her back. The townspeople had tried to help at first, but times were hard for everyone. Winter was coming, and families could barely feed their own children, let alone take in 2 more mouths. The local orphanage had been clear about their rules. They would take Lucy, but not the baby. Babies were too much work, they said. Too expensive to care for. That's when Mayor Johnson came up with his solution. "We'll find them both homes," he had promised, adjusting his thick glasses. "The auction is the fairest way. Good families will bid, and these children will have proper homes." But as Lucy looked around the crowded square, she wondered if the mayor really understood what was happening. She saw the faces in the crowd, and most of them didn't look like they wanted to give anyone a proper home. Some men were whispering and pointing at her in ways that made her skin crawl. A few women looked interested in Rose but kept shaking their heads when they remembered that Lucy came with the baby. Step up," called out Mr. Peterson, the town's auctioneer. His loud voice boomed across the square. "We have here a young girl, healthy and strong, good for housework and farm work, and she comes with a baby that just needs feeding and care." Lucy felt her cheeks burn with shame. She wasn't cattle or furniture to be sold, but that's exactly how Mr. Peterson was treating her. She held Rose closer, feeling the baby's warm breath against her neck. Rose was the only family she had left, and Lucy would do anything to keep them together. "Do I hear $5? Mr. Peterson called out. A man with yellowed teeth and dirty fingernails raised his hand. Lucy had seen him around town before, and the way he looked at young girls made her stomach turn. She prayed silently that anyone else would bid higher. $10, called out a woman from the back. Lucy turned to see Mrs. Williams, who ran the town's laundry service. She was known for working her help hard, but at least she was a woman. Maybe she would be kind to Rose. 15. The yellow-toothed man wasn't giving up easily. Lucy's heart pounded as the bidding continued. She watched the numbers go higher, but she also watched the faces. Mrs. Williams looked uncertain now, probably worried about the cost. The man with bad teeth looked determined, and that scared Lucy more than anything. Standing at the very edge of the crowd, almost hidden by his horse and wagon, was a tall man Lucy had never seen before. He wore a worn brown hat pulled low over his eyes, and his clothes were the practical kind that ranchers wore. His face was weathered from years in the sun, with lines around his eyes that could have come from squinting at distant horizons or from years of sadness. Lucy couldn't tell which dot the man watched the auction with a frown growing deeper on his face. Every time the yellow-toothed man bid, the rancher's jaw tightened a little more. When Mrs. Williams dropped out at $20, Lucy felt her last hope slipping away. 25. The yellow-toothed man grinned, showing his rotting teeth. "That girl will work off every penny, and the baby won't be eating much for long anyway." Lucy's blood went cold. She understood exactly what he meant, and it wasn't about feeding Rose properly. She looked around desperately, hoping someone would save them. But most people were looking at their feet now, uncomfortable with how the auction was going. That's when the tall rancher stepped forward. $50. The crowd went quiet. $50 was more money than most people in town saw in 2 months. Mr. Peterson's mouth fell open, and even the yellow-toothed man looked shocked. "Did you say $50, sir?" Mr. Peterson asked, wanting to make sure he heard correctly. The rancher nodded once, his eyes never leaving Lucy's face. There was something in his expression that made her feel less afraid, though she couldn't say why. He didn't look at her the way the other men had, like she was something to be used. He looked at her like she was a person, a young girl who deserved better than this. 75. The yellow-toothed man wasn't ready to give up, but his voice cracked a little. That was a lot of money, even for someone determined to win. Without hesitation, the rancher said, $100. This time, the whole crowd gasped. $100 could buy a good horse or feed a family for half a year. Lucy stared at the stranger, wondering why he would pay so much for her and Rose. Was he rich? Was he crazy? Or was there something else? The yellow-toothed man looked angry but shook his head. He didn't have that kind of money, and everyone knew it. Mrs. Williams had already walked away, shaking her head at the high prices. Nobody else in the crowd looked ready to bid against $100. Going once, going twice. Mr. Peterson looked around the crowd one more time. Sold to the gentleman in the brown hat. Lucy felt her knees go weak with relief. She still didn't know anything about this rancher, but at least Rose would be safe from the horrible man who had been bidding against him. As people started to scatter, talking excitedly about the huge sum of money, the rancher walked over to where Lucy stood, up close. She could see that his eyes were a deep brown, kind but sad. He looked down at baby Rose, who had slept through the entire auction, and his expression softened even more. "What's the baby's name?" he asked quietly. His voice was rough but gentle, like he didn't talk to people very often. "Rose," Lucy whispered, still not quite believing what had just happened. "And I'm Lucy," the rancher nodded. "I'm Thomas. Thomas McKenna." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "I have a ranch about an hour's ride from here. It's not fancy, but it's warm and safe." Lucy studied his face, trying to figure out what kind of man would spend so much money on two strangers. "Why did you buy us?" she asked, then quickly added, "Thank you, but why?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the hills beyond the town. "Let's just say I know what it's like to lose everything," he finally said. "And I know what it's like to be alone." As he helped Lucy up into his wagon and made sure Rose was comfortable, Lucy felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay after all. The wagon wheels creaked steadily as they rolled away from town, each turn taking Lucy further from everything she had ever known. She sat stiffly on the wooden bench beside Thomas, baby Rose bundled in her arms, wrapped in the only blanket they owned. The silence between them felt heavy, broken only by the clip-clop of the horse's hooves and Rose's occasional soft whimpers. Lucy stole glances at the man who had just bought her life for $100. Thomas kept his eyes on the dirt road. Ahead, his weathered hands steady on the reins. His face gave nothing away, and Lucy found herself wondering what kind of life awaited them at his ranch. Was he married? Did he have children? Why had he really bid so much money for two strangers? The questions swirled in her mind, but every time she opened her mouth to speak, the words seemed to stick in her throat. What if she said something wrong? What if he changed his mind about taking them in? She had heard stories of people who bought workers at auctions and then treated them terribly. Her stomach twisted with worry as she imagined all the things that could go wrong. "Are you hungry?" Thomas asked suddenly, his voice cutting through her anxious thoughts. Lucy looked up, surprised. She hadn't expected him to speak, let alone ask about her comfort. "A little," she admitted, though the truth was she was very hungry. She hadn't eaten anything since yesterday morning, but she didn't want to seem demanding. Thomas reached behind the bench and pulled out a cloth bag. "There's bread and some dried meat in there. Help yourself." Lucy's eyes widened. The bread was fresh and soft, not the stale crusts she had been surviving on. She tore off a small piece and ate it slowly, trying to make it last. The meat was salty and good, better than anything she had tasted in weeks. "Eat more," Thomas said, noticing how carefully she was rationing the food. "There's plenty more at home." Home. The word made Lucy's chest tighten. She hadn't had a real home since the fire. For weeks, she and Rose had been staying in the church. basement, sleeping on thin blankets and eating whatever people brought them out of pity? The idea of having a real home again seemed too good to be true. As they traveled, the landscape around them began to change. The dusty streets and crowded buildings of town gave way to rolling hills covered in tall grass. Cattle dotted the pastures, and Lucy could see mountains in the distance, their peaks touched with the first hint of autumn snow. It was beautiful in a way that made her heart ache, reminding her of the view from her family's old farm. "How much further?" she asked, shifting Rose to her other arm. The baby was starting to fuss, probably needing to be fed soon. "About another hour," Thomas replied. He glanced at Rose, who was making little hungry sounds. "Does she need to stop?" "For feeding?" Lucy nodded, grateful that he understood. "If that's okay." Thomas pulled the wagon off the road near a small stream. He helped Lucy down and then busied himself watering the horses while she found a private spot to feed Rose. As she sat by the stream, listening to the gentle flow of water and feeling the warm sun on her face, Lucy allowed herself to relax for the first time in weeks. When she returned to the wagon, Thomas was leaning against it, chewing on a piece of grass. "Better?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." Lucy settled Rose back in her arms, and the baby immediately fell asleep. Her tiny fist curled against Lucy's chest. They rode in comfortable silence for a while longer until Thomas pointed ahead. "There it is." Lucy looked where he was pointing and saw a house in the distance, bigger than she had expected. It was built of sturdy wood with a wide front porch and several outbuildings scattered around it. Smoke was rising from the chimney, and the whole place looked solid and welcoming. It looked like a real home, the kind of place where families lived and children grew up safely. As they got closer, Lucy noticed that the house needed some care. The porch had a few loose boards, and the garden was overgrown with weeds. It was clear that no woman had been taking care of the place for a while. This observation made her even more curious about Thomas's story, but she still didn't dare ask direct questions. Thomas brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down. He came around to help Lucy, reaching up to take Rose, so Lucy could get down safely. For a moment, their hands touched as he took the baby, and Lucy noticed how gentle he was, how carefully he cradled Rose against his chest. "She's so small," he murmured, looking down at the sleeping baby with an expression Lucy couldn't quite read. There was sadness there, and something else, longing maybe. "She's grown since she was born," Lucy said, stepping down from the wagon. "Anna used to say she was going to be tall like our father." Thomas looked up at the mention of Lucy's sister. "Anna was Rose's mother?" Lucy nodded, her throat tightening. "She died in the fire trying to save our family's things. I tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen." "I'm sorry," Thomas said quietly. "Losing family is hard." Something in his voice told Lucy that he knew about loss personally, but before she could think more about it, Thomas was already walking toward the house. "Come on. Let me show you around." The inside of the house surprised Lucy even more than the outside had. It was spacious and comfortable, with a large stone fireplace and sturdy wooden furniture. Everything was clean but had the feel of a place where only one person lived. There were no feminine touches, no flowers or decorative items that would suggest a woman's presence. "The kitchen is through here," Thomas said, leading her to a room with a big wood stove and a table that could easily seat 6 people. "I'm not much of a cook, but there's plenty of food." He opened a cupboard to show shelves lined with canned goods, flour, sugar, and other supplies. Lucy's eyes widened. She hadn't seen so much food in one place since before the fire. "Upstairs are the bedrooms," Thomas continued, still holding Rose. "I thought you and the baby could take the room at the end of the hall. It has good light and stays warm." Lucy followed him up the wooden stairs, her bare feet silent on the smooth boards. The hallway was lined with doors, and she wondered how many bedrooms the house had. It seemed far too big for just one man. Thomas opened the door at the end of the hall and stepped back to let Lucy see inside. The room took her breath away. It was painted a soft yellow color, with white curtains at the windows and a beautiful wooden cradle in one corner. There was a single bed with a colorful quilt. A dresser, and even a rocking chair by the window. This was supposed to be ... Thomas started, then stopped himself. He cleared his throat and handed Rose back to Lucy. This was supposed to be a nursery. My wife, she prepared it before. Well, before she died? Lucy's heart clenched as she understood. Thomas had lost a wife and, from the looks of the cradle, probably a baby too. That explained the sadness in his eyes, the loneliness that seemed to cling to him like a shadow. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not knowing what else to say. Thomas nodded, his jaw tight. "That was 10 years ago. The room's just been sitting here empty ever since." He paused at the doorway. Maybe it's time it was used for what it was meant for. As Thomas left her alone to settle in, Lucy sat in the rocking chair with Rose and looked around the beautiful room. For the first time in weeks, she felt truly safe. But she also felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Thomas had saved them, but she could see the pain in his eyes. Maybe somehow she and Rose could help heal his broken heart, just as he was giving them a chance to heal theirs. The first week at the McKenna Ranch passed like a strange dream for Lucy. She woke each morning in the yellow nursery, sunlight streaming through the white curtains, and for a moment she would forget where she was. Then Rose would make her soft morning sounds, and reality would come flooding back. She was safe. They both were. Thomas had given her simple instructions that first day. "Make yourself at home," he had said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Take what you need from the kitchen. There are clothes in the dresser that might fit you." Then he had disappeared outside to tend to his cattle, leaving Lucy alone to figure out how to live in this new world. The clothes in the dresser had clearly belonged to Thomas's wife. They were simple but well-made dresses in soft blues and greens, with petticoats and aprons to match. Lucy had never owned anything so fine. She chose the plainest dress she could find, not wanting to seem like she was taking advantage of Thomas's kindness. By the second day, Lucy had started to feel restless. She wasn't used to sitting idle, and the house, while clean, clearly needed a woman's touch. The floors were dusty, the windows were cloudy, and the kitchen looked like someone who cooked only for survival, not for pleasure. Without asking permission, Lucy began to clean. She started small, washing the dishes that had piled up in the kitchen sink. Then she swept the floors and scrubbed the windows until they sparkled. When Thomas came in for lunch, he stopped in the doorway and stared at the transformation. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, looking uncomfortable. "I wanted to," Lucy replied, bouncing Rose gently in her arms. "I like keeping busy, and you've been so kind to us." Thomas nodded but didn't say anything else. Lucy noticed he ate his lunch more slowly than usual, as if he was enjoying sitting in the clean, bright kitchen. By the end of the first week, Lucy had established a routine. She would wake early to feed Rose, then start breakfast for Thomas before he went out to work. While Rose napped, she would clean and organize different parts of the house. In the afternoons, she would sit on the front porch with the baby, watching the cattle graze in the distance and enjoying the peaceful quiet of the ranch. Thomas rarely spoke during meals, but Lucy could tell he was getting used to having them. There, he had started leaving fresh milk on the kitchen table each morning, and once she found a basket of eggs with a note that simply said, "From the chickens." Lucy smiled at his awkward kindness. The real test came at the beginning of the second week when Rose developed a fever. Lucy woke up in the middle of the night to find the baby burning hot and crying inconsolably. Panic seized her heart as she remembered how quickly babies could become seriously ill. She had no money for a doctor and no idea what to do. Without thinking, she ran down the hall to Thomas's room and knocked frantically on his door. "Please," she called out, her voice breaking. "Something's wrong with Rose." Thomas opened the door immediately, still pulling on his shirt. His hair was messy from sleep, but his eyes were alert and focused. "What's wrong?" "She's so hot," Lucy sobbed, holding out the crying baby. "I don't know what to do. What if she dies? What if I lose her too?" Thomas took Rose gently and felt her forehead with the back of his hand. "She's got a fever, but she's breathing fine. That's a good sign." His voice was calm and steady, which helped slow Lucy's racing heart. My wife used to make a tea for fevers. I think I remember how. For the next hour, Thomas worked beside Lucy to help bring down Rose's fever. He showed her how to make the herbal tea and how to use cool cloths to help the baby feel better. When Rose finally stopped crying and fell into a peaceful sleep, Lucy collapsed into the rocking chair, exhausted and emotionally drained. "Thank you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I was so scared." Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, looking down at the sleeping baby. "You did good," he said quietly. "You knew to ask for help when you needed it. That takes courage." "I can't lose her," Lucy said, her voice barely audible. "She's all I have left of my family." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than Lucy had ever heard it. "I know what that feels like. After my wife and son died, I thought my life was over. I stopped caring about anything or anyone." Lucy looked up at him, seeing the pain in his eyes. "What changed?" "Time, mostly. And learning that sometimes the family you choose can be just as important as the family you're born with." He stood up and moved toward the door. "Try to get some sleep. I'll check on her in a few hours." The next morning, Rose's fever had broken completely. She was back to her normal, happy self, babbling and reaching for Lucy's face with tiny fingers. When Thomas came in for breakfast, he went straight to the baby and gently touched her forehead. "Much better," he said with obvious relief. Then he looked at Lucy with something that might have been pride. "You're a good mother to her." "I'm not her mother," Lucy said quickly. "I'm just her aunt." "Sometimes that doesn't matter," Thomas replied. "What matters is how much you love her." After that night, something changed between them. Thomas began talking more during meals, telling Lucy about the ranch and the cattle. He showed her how to collect eggs from the chickens and how to milk the cow. Lucy discovered that she enjoyed learning these new skills, and Thomas seemed to enjoy teaching her. One afternoon, as Lucy was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, Thomas approached her with something in his hands. "I made this," he said, holding out a small wooden toy. It was a perfectly carved horse, smooth and beautiful. "For Rose?" Lucy asked, taking the toy and admiring the craftsmanship. Thomas nodded, looking embarrassed. "Babies like things to hold, right? I wasn't sure what to make." Lucy felt tears prick her eyes. The toy was clearly made with love and patience, each detail carefully carved. "It's beautiful. She'd love it." That evening, as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Lucy held Rose on her lap while the baby examined her new toy. Thomas sat in the chair beside them, and for the first time since arriving at the ranch, the silence between them felt comfortable rather than awkward. "Thomas," Lucy said finally, "why did you really bid on us at the auction?" Thomas was quiet for so long that Lucy thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "When I saw you holding that baby, protecting her, even though you were just a child yourself, it reminded me of something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" "That love doesn't always come in the package you expect. And sometimes the people who need saving are the ones who end up doing the saving." Lucy looked over at him, understanding flooding through her. Thomas hadn't just saved her. And Rose that day. Maybe, in some way, they were saving him too. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Lucy felt something she hadn't experienced since before the fire. She felt like she belonged somewhere, like she was part of something bigger than just survival. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope that this feeling might last. 3 months had passed since the auction, and life at the McKenna Ranch had settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Lucy had grown stronger and more confident. Her cheeks had filled out from regular meals, and her eyes had lost that haunted look of someone who had lost everything. Rose had grown too, babbling happily and reaching for everything within her tiny grasp. She had learned to sit up on her own and would squeal with delight whenever Thomas walked into the room. Thomas himself had changed in ways that surprised even him. The house was alive again with the sounds of laughter and conversation. Lucy had transformed the place into a real home, with fresh flowers on the kitchen table and the smell of bread baking in the oven. He found himself looking forward to mealtimes. Not just for the excellent food Lucy prepared, but for the company and the sense of belonging he had forgotten he could feel. The neighboring ranchers had started to notice the changes too. When Thomas rode into town for supplies, people commented on how different he seemed. "You're looking well, Thomas," old Mr. Harrison had said just last week. "That girl you took in must be working out fine." "She's family," Thomas had replied. Without thinking, then stopped, surprised by his own words. But as he thought about it more, he realized it was true. Lucy and Rose had become his family in every way that mattered. Lucy had started talking about the future, too. She mentioned wanting to learn to read better and maybe help teach the younger children at the Sunday school in town. Thomas had encouraged her dreams, even offering to buy her books and help her practice. Watching her confidence grow filled him with a pride he had never expected to feel. Everything was perfect until the morning, when strangers appeared at their door. Lucy was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Thomas had already gone out to check on the cattle, so she wiped her hands on her apron and went to see who was visiting so early. Through the window she saw two men in expensive city clothes climbing down from a fancy carriage. Her stomach immediately twisted with worry. The older man had gray hair and wore a suit that probably cost more than most people made in a year. The younger man looked to be in his 30s, with cold eyes and a mouth that seemed permanently twisted in disapproval. Lucy had never seen either of them before, but something about the way they looked at the house, like they were evaluating its worth, made her deeply uneasy. The older man knocked on the door with more force than was polite. When Lucy opened it, he removed his hat but didn't smile. "Miss Lucy Porter, I presume?" Lucy's blood ran cold. Very few people knew her last name, and she certainly hadn't told it to these strangers. "Who's asking?" "I am Judge William Crawford, from the county seat, and this is my nephew, Robert Crawford. We've come about the child." "What child?" Lucy asked, though her heart was already sinking. "The infant, Rose Porter. We understand you've been caring for her since her mother's death." Lucy stepped back instinctively, as if she could physically protect Rose from whatever these men wanted. "Rose is fine. She's my sister's daughter, and I'm taking good care of her." Judge Crawford pushed past Lucy into the house without being invited. His nephew followed, looking around with obvious disdain at the simple furnishings. "That may be," the judge said, "but you're hardly in a position to provide for a child properly. You're barely more than a child yourself, and you're unmarried, living here with a man who isn't even related to you." "Thomas saved us," Lucy said, her voice rising with anger and fear. "He gave us a home when no one else would help." "Yes, we heard about the auction." Robert Crawford spoke for the first time, his voice dripping with disapproval. "Quite scandalous, really, a young girl being sold like livestock." Lucy wanted to defend Thomas, to explain that it hadn't been like that at all, but before she could speak, Judge Crawford continued. "We've come to take the child back where she belongs with proper family. I am her proper family." Lucy cried. "I'm her aunt. I've been taking care of her since she was born." "You're a 16-year-old girl with no means of support," the judge replied coldly. "Rose Porter stands to inherit a considerable sum of money from her father's estate. Money that was left in trust for her care and education. Money that should be managed by responsible adult relatives." Lucy's mind raced. "What father's estate? Anna never married. Rose's father ran off before she was born." Judge Crawford and his nephew exchanged a look. "Perhaps your sister didn't tell you everything," Robert said with a thin smile. "Rose's father was my late brother, Charles Crawford. He may not have married your sister, but he acknowledged the child in his will before he died last month." The room seemed to spin around Lucy. "That's impossible. Anna would have told me." "Your sister probably thought Charles would never acknowledge the child," Judge Crawford said, pulling official-looking papers from his coat. "But Charles had a change of heart before his death. He left a substantial inheritance to any children he might have, and Rose is his only heir." Lucy felt like she couldn't breathe. "You just want her money." "We want what's best for the child," Robert said. but his eyes were cold and calculating. She deserves to grow up with proper education, proper society, not on some isolated ranch with people who aren't even her real family. We are her real family, Lucy shouted just as the front door opened and Thomas walked in. He took in the scene immediately, Lucy's tear-streaked face, the two strange men in expensive clothes, and the tension that filled the room like smoke. What's going on? Here? Judge Crawford turned to face Thomas with obvious disapproval. You must be McKenna. We've come for the child. This young woman has no legal right to keep her. Thomas's face went dangerously quiet the way it did when he was trying to control his temper. Lucy has every right. She's been Rose's guardian since her sister died. Hardly, Robert scoffed. She's an unmarried minor living in sin with a man twice her age. No court would allow such an arrangement to continue. Watch your tongue, Thomas said, his voice low and threatening. Lucy is like a daughter to me, and Rose is like my granddaughter. They're both under my protection. Your protection means nothing legally, Judge Crawford said, waving his papers. I have custody orders signed by 3 judges. The child comes with us today. Lucy ran to where Rose was sleeping in her cradle and picked her up, holding her close. Rose woke up and looked around with confused eyes, sensing the tension in the room. You can't take her, Lucy whispered. Please, she's all I have left. You're being selfish, Robert said harshly. That child could have the finest education, the best opportunities. Instead, you want to keep her here to live like a farm girl. Thomas stepped forward, and Lucy had never seen him look so angry. There's nothing wrong with honest work and honest living. Rose is loved here. She's happy. Isn't that worth more than money? Love doesn't pay for proper schooling or medical care, Judge Crawford replied. The child's inheritance will ensure. She has every advantage. And who will manage this inheritance? Thomas asked suspiciously. Robert smiled coldly. As her nearest adult male relative, that responsibility would fall to me. The truth hit Lucy like a physical blow. These men didn't care about Rose at all. They wanted to control her inheritance, and once they had it, what would happen to Rose? Herself? She looked at Thomas desperately, hoping he could find a way to stop this. Thomas met her eyes, and she saw her own determination reflected there. We won't let them take her, he said quietly. But his words carried the weight of a promise. Judge Crawford laughed harshly. You have no choice in the matter. The law is clear. But as Lucy held Rose closer and felt Thomas's steady presence beside her, she realized something important. They had become a real family, bound not by blood or law but by love and choice. And real families didn't give up on each other without a fight.